Eventually they win. But they don't kill them all. Some get away. This is Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 16. Dan, this is the place where those scripture verses would come in handy. There you go. Okay? They came and they fought against them. Now, who were the Amalekites? Anyone remember where Amalek comes from? What's his lineage? Genesis chapter 36, verse 12. He was, as Sharon just mentioned, a child of Esau, Israel's brother. So Israel and the Amalekites are cousins. This almost seems to be like a feud. The Hatfields and McCoy, whatever. It's just an interesting thing. And then what we see in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 19. Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19 is where we are told, remember, do not forget. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt. How he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks. All the stragglers at your rear when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. And this is where I always love this oxymoron. It says, remember, forget. That's what we're commanded to do. Remember to forget. This is where this whole Shabbat of remembrance comes in. Fast forward about 500 years. About 500 years. A little less. And we come up upon the story of Saul. Remember who Saul was? Saul was one of the kings of Israel. He was the first king of Israel. He was appointed by Samuel, the prophet, to be king. And he was given a task. In 1 Samuel 15, he was given a task. Saul was. 1 Samuel 15, verses 1 through 9. Okay? This is the story where Samuel says to Saul, there are these Amalekite people. You need to take care of them. The Israelites were supposed to take care of this a long time ago. They didn't. Now it's your turn. Be a king and go and destroy them all. Every single one. Lottie-dottie. Everybody. Not animals, nothing are to survive. Everything is to be destroyed. And he goes out and he soundly thrashes the Amalekites, but in verse 33, we read that he didn't kill them all. Okay? There was one that was left. Samuel had to take care of it himself. His name was Agag. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, as we read in 1 Samuel 15 in verse 9. 1 Samuel 15 But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, and the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them, but everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. Agag was the king of the Amalekites. Now, this man in the court of King Xerxes was a descendant, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Anytime you put an "ite" at the end of something like that in Hebrew, it means of those people. So, this man I'm talking about was a descendant of Agag, who was a descendant of Amalek, so he was one of the Amalekites that should have been destroyed. His name was Haman. And the reason that we boo is because Haman, the prime minister's name, was supposed to be blotted out with all the rest of the Amalekites. That's why we have the groggers, and we shout boo every time his name is mentioned during the feast of Purim. Okay? So this man, the prime minister, during this time of finding a new queen and Mordecai discovering this trial, had been raised up to be essentially the second-hand guy to the king. In fact, he had been given the king's signet, which meant that he had the power and the authority to do whatever he wanted to do. He had great ambition. He had great ambition. And his conquests were many. We're going to see just what his contribution was. So, this prime minister, walking through the streets, gets paid incredible respect. People bowing down, kowtowing to him because he is the one with the signet ring, and he can do as he pleases. The only problem is Mordecai, Jewish guy, doesn't bow down to man. He only bows down before God, as it should be. But the prime minister didn't like this. And so he started this vendetta against Mordecai. It started just against Mordecai. It eventually became against the entire Jewish nation and all Jewish people everywhere. So one night when the king was having a hard time sleeping, he pulls out the Chronicles. Okay? We have Chronicles in our Bible. Every king had Chronicles. And that's the best way to get yourself to sleep, reading these Chronicles. Okay? He was reading in his Chronicles, and he came across this account of how this Jewish guy, Mordecai, overheard this plot to kill him. And he thought, hey, I've never done anything for this guy. I should probably change that. But I really don't know what to do. I know. Let's ask the prime minister. He'll know. So he goes to the prime minister, and he asks the prime minister, hey, what do you do for somebody that the king really, really wants to honor? And the prime minister, in his egotistic nature, thinks the king's talking about him and that he's going to honor him for all that he has done. And so he comes up with this grand scheme. He says, all right, you want to honor somebody? This is what you do. You get your best armor, you put the armor on him. You get out your best horse, and you put him on your best horse in your best armor, and you lead him through the streets of Shushan, saying, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Thinking that in just a few short hours, he was going to be dressed in the king's armor, on the king's shining horse, and being led through the town. Instead, the king says, great idea! Go do that for Mordecai. And he is just shocked and amazed and stunned as he is leading Mordecai, dressed in the king's armor, on the king's very own steed, shouting at the top of his lungs, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. That kicked up the prime minister's hatred of Mordecai and the Jews just another notch, until he decides, you know what? Mordecai's done. In fact, his entire people group, done. We're not going to have any of this anymore. It's time to get rid of them for good. So they draw lots for a date. And the lots fall on the 13th day of the month of Adar. That's the date that is set for the destruction of the Jewish people. And he seals it with that signet ring he's got on. Done. And the edict goes out throughout the land. Of course, that kind of news spreads pretty quickly. And guess who hears about it? Mordecai. Mordecai hears about it. And again, remember, Mordecai has an inn in the palace. So he arranges a meeting with his niece or his cousin Esther. And he says this, and this is going to be a paraphrase. Yo, you need to do something. Says, this is going to happen to the Jewish people on the 13th day of the month of Adar. You have got to go to the king, and you've got to tell him now that you're Jewish and have him do something about this. Otherwise, we're done. She hedges and hems and haws a little bit, and he says to her, look, you can do this or not do this, but the Jewish people are God's chosen people, and we will prevail. Somehow, some way, I don't know, but salvation will come to the Jews from someplace. But if you choose not to do this, you and your family will perish. Armed with that, Esther has to make a decision. Because if you go before the king and he hasn't called for you, that's instant death penalty. You know, not going to jail, do not pass go, do not collect 200 shekels. You know, it's the death penalty. The only thing that can spare you is if the king extends his scepter to you, and that's it. Otherwise, you're dead. Knowing this, Esther says to her cousin, all right, this is what you do. You have all of the Jewish people fast